Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wolf Vision's virtual collaboration experience. Today, we're joined by Tim Albright and a series of panelists for our topic on building and managing future-ready conference rooms. Tim, thank you, and take it away.
Thank you, Damon. My name is Tim Albright. I'm from AV Nation. With me is talk about future-ready rooms, and we'll point out the fact that we're not saying future-proof. We'll get into why that matters in a minute. First and foremost, Mr. Mark Coxon from Tangerine Interiors. Welcome, sir.
Thanks, Tim.
Also with us is Adewole from Barracks. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Also, Mark Jones from South College. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Tim.
And last but not least, Michael Dannenberg from Vantage. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Tim.
So, guys, want to start off here, and Mark, I'm going to give you the task of answering the hardest question. Why are we not saying future-proof?
I think the last 2 months taught us why we're not saying future-proof about anything, right? I mean, we're debating on whether we're even going back to workplaces at all, let alone what future-proofing those workplaces look like. So yeah, future-proof is kind of one of those bad words in the industry. We always want to make sure that we're connecting our short-term strategy and the technology that we have now to where we think we're going to go. But I hesitate saying future-proof to anyone because those technology cycles we don't control, right? So.
All right, Akin. Then when we start looking at today, right? Because that's all we have, right? We all have been in the midst of this crisis. You guys are starting to get calls, I'm certain, how to refit some of these spaces, right? What are some of the conversations you're having about future-ready rooms when it comes to getting back into the workplace?
I think some of the conversations are primarily, at least initially, around people's feeling like they're disconnected, and how do we help them get that connectivity back? So a lot of the conversations, people are like they're feeling lonely at home. They're not able to interface with people the way that they've typically done in the past, and it's just it kind of really creates this sort of lull in terms of the communication factor. So some of the things that we're looking at doing, at least at Barracks, are again, first having those conversations, kind of sit down and kind of understand where people are at and how they're feeling about things. And then second of all, we're really focused on making sure that we're putting together some solutions that will allow people to feel reconnected again. And I have some other technological kind of approaches towards how we can do that in a much more immersive way. But yeah, the focus is on really trying to make sure that people are not feeling lonely. They're feeling like they're reconnected with their brethren, and that they're able to have their conferences and communicate accordingly.
So, Michael, how do we do that in an age when making social distancing, right? Making sure that folks do stay far enough away from each other that it's healthy, but also having those conversations and having those collaborative meetings?
I think it comes down to corporate culture. You need to go back and look at how the structure of the corporation works, how the institution works with how they interact with each other, but making sure that you're outfitting spaces to make it easier for people to connect, make it consistent, making sure that there's policies in place to make sure that there's good connectivity wherever, whether it's an in-person, in-room conference meeting or a remote workspace for collaborative sessions, making sure that the audio quality is good, making sure that the staff have peripherals to accommodate a good audio experience and video experience. I think that's important, especially audio, making sure that you're controlling that environment and coaching them on how to use those spaces in this kind of new dynamic environment that we're in.
Mark Jones, you are from South College, so you've got a unique perspective from most of us here. As you guys look towards the fall, right? Obviously, you guys brought folks off of campus to finish out the semester, but you're looking towards the fall. Your challenges are different than corporate. What are some of the things that you guys are looking at on campus to keep your students safe, but also faculty? And what does that look like, for spring of 2021?
Well, that's a very, very good question. When we moved, when I had I think a 1 week notice from Pittsburgh, they were the first one to go. We moved about 300 total people home, and the goal was at home to work exactly like they did during the day with VPNs and soft phones and all those. So we literally, from financial aid to admissions to student services to all the students, we had about 4,500 students that, were on ground, and you already had online courses, but they had to go to full online, and all the instructors, had Zoom and all those. So everything had to transition in about 1 to 2 weeks. So going back this entire quarter, we've had actually growth with students coming in and everything looking well. We've already had some students come back in simply because we had to have labs. So we had to take the classrooms, and then you could only have 10 people per classroom, and a lot of coordination. But coming up in the summer, and then especially in the fall, we're hoping in Tennessee and in Atlanta, and in Nashville is the one sort of in question, is that have students back in. But if students don't feel safe to come in, that they could actually attend the classes through Zoom and those things. So we've implemented everything from routine cleaning to everything and face masks so that everybody comes in. But it's very unique to have a totally different experience in a higher education for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark Coxon, when you're looking at this issue right now, and folks are slowly bringing people back. Mark's in Southern California. Depending on which technology company you're reading today, some of them are saying, you know what, we're not bringing folks back until the end of the year. Some folks are starting in September. When you're looking at a workspace today and going, okay, these are those steps that we can take. Here's the technologies that we can put in place. But like Michael said, some of that is also company culture. How do you help your clients walk through this, honestly, this maze of getting back to work, bringing the people who need to be in the office back to work, but do so safely?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, there are varying levels of concern, and it depends on the company's their personnel in general. I'll say that the three main things that we're noticing. One thing Akin mentioned was making these meetings immersive. If you're going to be back in the office, why are you back in the office? And what we're finding with a lot of our companies that are more innovative, some of the companies you would typically think of as either new emerging, social media driven, entrepreneurship companies or Silicon Valley companies, the fact of the matter is that aha moments are not often scheduled, right? You don't say at 4:00 on Tuesday, we're going to have this great idea. It doesn't happen that way. And there is some creative power to having people in the same space. And when we can't have people in the same space, how are we creating that for people? So how are we creating spaces that people can come into in a way that they can actually have these creative collisions and be able to do that work? We're hearing horror stories of people have 8, 9, 10 Zoom meetings, because a Zoom meeting is a PowerPoint on steroids. It's just PowerPoint with 8 talking heads. I'm sorry, it's not very sexy, right? This platform was made for quick sharing of information, but it's not made really well for a brainstorming session or for people to go back and forth in a forum. We're doing this one at a time. It's hard for us to jump in. Somebody has to wait for me to stop and know if it's their turn. The workflow to this type of thing is very tricky. And so when we're looking at spaces like, okay, if we're going to redo your office, let's create spaces that are unique to this place, that you cannot do those things remotely, and that there's a reason for being in this room. One of the other challenges that we're seeing in that same thing, Michael mentioned and Mark mentioned, people adopted these ad hoc tools really quick when they had to go home, when they had to go, when they couldn't go in the office. Somebody flipped a switch and the office was closed. People are coming back and they've learned how to use a tool like Zoom ad hoc, and they're coming back into a corporate environment that may use Teams as a platform, or may use Cisco WebEx as a platform, or may have security concerns about Zoom talking to like, let's say the Navy says they can't do Zoom calls, right? So now we come in and we say, all right, how are we taking all this momentum we had with our employees as something they know how to use like Zoom, and now how we, I guess, unifying platforms or creating a strategy to help them connect all these different places and all these different locations that they're now sitting at. Instead of 12 people in a room, it's 6 in one room, 3 in another, 2 at their desk. How are we doing that in a way that we can honor both the security and this inertia momentum that we already have? And these are the type of things where we're starting to look for unique products that do mashup software that can live over the top of 3 different soft codec platforms. Or we're looking for things like workflow solutions where it uses all the things we have in Zoom, a whiteboard and cameras, but it does it in a way that guides them through a creative workflow where they actually get work done. And those are the kind of conversations we've been having.
Yeah, absolutely. Akin, when you're talking to folks and you're talking about, getting back into work and making this kind of a future ready room for, the next 6 months or the next 2 years, let's say, one of the things that folks are saying is that you've got to be able to make sure that there's a reason to go back to the office. It's kind of like what Mark was saying. One of those reasons is telling that story, right? Helping those folks tell the story of why they're there. How do you, what is it that you're grabbing out of clients to help them tell that story?
So, I feel like telling stories is kind of like that's my passion. I do a lot of like photo and film work, and telling stories in conference spaces is, it's kind of like what we're tasked to do as companies, is to help our clients tell stories to, whether there's an internal clients or external clients, and then also to make sure that those audiences, are being engaged, that they're stimulated by the information that's coming in. So one of the things that that I've been really kind of focused on as of recent is coming up with solutions. How do we actually bring that into the conference space? How do we bring that sort of stimulation, that sort of creativity, that sort of immersiveness into conference spaces? And I think one of the ways that we can start doing that is by looking at some kind of alternate technologies. It's stuff that we're all kind of very familiar with. It's I'm talking about like all the reality-based technologies, virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality, mixed reality. There is an entire world that I think that we haven't really touched because we primarily kind of left it up to the gaming industry primarily. But there's a lot of like real-time resources that will allow us to utilize virtual spaces in a very connected way, in terms of being able to share information, in terms of visualization of that information, and I think most importantly, making sure that the experience that people walk away from, that they actually want to come back into that conference space again. And we're talking about a hybrid. So it's going to be some people that may be in the office space and some people that will be at home. It may be a hybrid in terms of people who have full-on head-mounted displays and they're kind of in this sort of virtual space, or it could be like somebody who just has an augmented space using like augmented reality. So those are some of the things that I've been kind of like kind of pushing. It's kind of like a Wild West. It's like it's a brand new area. There's not a whole lot of people that are doing it, but it's so very, very relevant. We talk about the gaming industry, we talk about esports. All of that technology is literally right there. And as integrators, we're responsible for taking all this disparate technologies and bringing them together. And we do that with audio systems, video systems, control systems, display technologies. Well, I think it's definitely time for us to start learning some newer technologies and start integrating those to give people some more immersive and interactive experiences.
Yeah.
Real quickly, Akin, before I let you go on to the next question here. I know what AR is, augmented reality. Define for me real quickly what mixed reality is.
So it's actually a mix of virtual reality and augmented reality. Okay. So it's kind of a combination of the two.
Very cool. All right, Michael. Both Mark and Akin starting talking about like very, very leading edge technologies here to get folks going. One of the other things though is also making sure that the systems are leveraging existing technologies that we have today. What are some of the things that you're doing to help your clients kind of future proof and get in there?
Well, I like to look at a very common thing is room scheduling, making sure, and especially now with the pandemic, is if you're going into the office, making sure that a conference room has the ability to book and that you can now schedule it to make sure that you can control how many people are going in, what the times are, to give times to make sure that there's cleaning available, in between room sessions, but also making it, how can we work with the existing technologies out there to make the conference room experience a little bit more intuitive and a little bit more hands-on. So there's technologies out there like beacon technologies near field where you can walk in and the room senses the host that set up the meeting and can automatically start the meeting if you wanted it to do that. It has occupancy sensors to determine if nobody actually came into that room, you can release that room and alert somebody that nobody came into that room. It doesn't need to be cleaned, but you can at least control that. So there's a lot of easier ways to be able to do, come in, drop your phone down and leverage some of the room peripherals in there with your own personal device. So you're coming in, connecting up wired or wirelessly, and be able to engage a call, engage a web session in that conference room, and be able to do it very seamlessly with the technology that you're used to already, that's pervasive and it's already in your life, and making it as easy as possible for people to walk into a space and use that space and connect to remote endpoints seamlessly and have that good user experience, a controlled audio and video environment that allows you to connect to all of those other endpoints.
Mark Jones, when you talk out to faculty, and whether it's full-time faculty, adjunct faculty, what are they telling you that they're looking forward to, or they're looking for in the next generation or the next iteration of in-person classroom? Is it, like Akin was saying, some of these mixed reality or mixed sessions where you have some students who are in class social distancing, but you also have some that we can bring in remotely? Or is it a traditional, or what we would call traditional, I guess at this point, Zoom meeting where everybody's remote?
Yeah, that's another good one. Even up to the chancellor's level in the boardrooms, which they'll have faculty in there as well and staff, and so we really stepped up utilizing the Zoom room and the sign app in moving. We've got 10 classrooms right now. We're building out with the whole Wolf Vision build out, tying it in with the boardroom. So literally they can go in and hit a button and bring every boardroom up or multiple classrooms up and do presentations to them. It's basically touchless. And so if somebody needs to do a presentation, they have their laptop that comes in, put it in and connect right up there. The big thing that the faculty wanted is they really loved Zoom and being able with Canvas, which is our student system, and they could interact with the classroom, interact with classes, record it, and then it gets posted right through Zoom into Panopto and gives them, everything from a transcription to the audio, the video, and all of those, where the students can actually hear what's going on. The biggest thing is being able to get the content to the students and the students pay attention and listen to it, which, as I think it was Mark was saying, the video or the audio, or it might have been Michael, is the extreme important, which we found. And in our new design rooms, we're really almost going back to an old school style from using mixing boards versus DSPs, especially with the sign app being able to provide that. So if the students are physically there or they're at home working on it, that's what the instructor, they just want to be able to get to all the instructors the same and be able to answer questions as well to each one of those students, whether they're in the classroom or whether they're at home.
Mark Coxon, one of the things that Michael brought up was kind of that whole BYOD, bring your own device scenario. When you look at this and you're talking to clients, there is a danger here, right, of folks bringing in their own devices, whether that is for control or for connectivity. There's a security risk there, right? So how do we negate some of that, or is it that I will reference Teresa Payton probably until I retire, but she's said famously that it's not a question of when you get hacked, it's if you get hacked, the question is when. So how do we help your clients negate some of those security risks while at the same time inviting people to bring in their own devices and inviting people to bring in their own systems to kind of not just flatten that curve, but also protect everybody else from a health standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this a lot with touchless, with room control, with even contact tracing, digital contact tracing, where if I come into the office and I log in on my app that I'm in the office and I'm going to go sit at this desk, if somebody else sits at that desk 3 weeks later or 2 days before me and they end up being sick, then I'll get an alert that, hey, you were in a location where someone who ended up being diagnosed with COVID was sitting at one point, and you may want to get checked. We're seeing that all over. I think, as far as from a security standpoint, my view is that a personal device, this phone that I have is, you can't see it because my virtual background, this phone that I have is a personal device, but it was given to me by my company. So it's a personal device that no one else touches. So my health risk is low, but it's also an employer provided device that they control the level of access software, et cetera, that's on that. A lot of times too, if we're going through a cloud intermediary, sometimes that can be something that's helpful, right? So if we're looking at like an IP-based control system that's based, that acts as some mediator. You're going through your login, it's your secure login, and then it's going through some back wall, firewalled connection to the back. You're not logging directly with your device into the equipment in the room, where there would be this chance of something in your device, a virus, transferring directly into the equipment, right? Like we've seen with HVAC companies or something, where somebody comes in to do the HVAC system and the virus from their personal laptop gets all of a sudden into the computer system, right? In this case, if we're going through that cloud-based portal, the chances of malware on my phone going through the cloud, finding a tunnel back into the system somewhere is very, very low, as opposed to direct login. So I think, there are these layers that we start to build. But again, I mean, a lot of it can be same with this laptop. It's provided by my company. I have a Surface Book. It's provided by my company. Nobody else touches it. There's no health risk to me touching it. I'm not going to get any germs other than mine from it. But it's controlled, and the security's already been taken care of by somebody else. So I think we have to start to look at that. And I'm a big fan of what Michael said. I mean, we want to leverage what's in people's pockets and what's in their laptop bags. Right. If the easiest path to getting these things working and getting us back to being productive is to leverage the things we know and use every single day. So.
Yeah. All right, Akin, we've talked about kind of getting back to work and what that looks like here in the near future. Mm-hmm. And I agree with Mark about future proofing or future future proofing rooms. But let's take a look at a year from now, right? Or maybe even a 2 years from now. Mm-hmm. What does that look like? Is it a just another iteration of this immediate step? Or is it something where, we do move to a touchless, whether that's voice or that's RFIDs or it's Bluetooth or something like that? What does that next step of protection look like in the work environment?
Well, with everything that's happened in the course of the past 3 months, I hope that we're learning some lessons. And I think that we really cannot expect to do things in 6 months, a year, or 2 years the way that we're doing it. Even if COVID, there's a vaccine and things, and everybody was able to have it. The fact of the matter is that it could happen again. Like part of the issue that we're having is that we just weren't ready for this sort of a situation. So we have, now that we've got the knowledge that this is very real, this can happen again. I think we need to start thinking about how we fortify our conference spaces, how we introduce virtual conferencing into the mix. And again, really looking at how we're going to do things a little bit differently. The traditional conferencing systems that we're doing, the traditional 2D Zoom, calls, Cisco calls, Jabber, and Microsoft Teams. I think in order for us to really give our clients, an experience that's going to go beyond, what we're currently doing today. And I think we lose a little bit of that, unfortunately, because people aren't close to one another. So we have to kind of figure out how to fill in that gap. We have to really kind of think about, how can we make this, value added for our clients. So again, it kind of goes back to, some of the technologies we was talking about before, and really taking a really close look at that. I would love to be able to see some level of, virtual in a more 3D and type of way in conference rooms within a couple of years. I think that's probably, when we'll figure it out enough to be able to start integrating systems that have more virtual capabilities, hardware, visualizations, and so forth. And I'll just say that this stuff is very real. Like, there's a couple of different conferences that I would definitely recommend people check out if they want to kind of start understanding about what's needed from a hardware standpoint to start kind of making some of this stuff work. And there's plenty of applications out there that are currently being used today by companies and business and R&D labs that are actually using these technologies to have these sort of experiences with their clients, and then also internally for themselves. So, like Unreal Engine, they have a conference called Unreal Fest in July that talks about, how they're using gaming engines to basically do all of this virtual in real time. I just attended another conference called RTC 2020, which was a real-time conference 2020, which again talked about the same thing. And then one other conference is SIGGRAPH, which happens typically during the summertime. Typically, again, it's all about gamers, but the fact of the matter is they've got the tech for us to be able to do some of these really cool things in our own personal spaces. So I would love to see some of that come to fruition.
I'm going to jump in here too, Tim, just as since I have the ability to do so. I'll second SIGGRAPH. My brother-in-law was a multimedia engineer for Lockheed Martin, and they've been looking at this stuff for 12 years. And SIGGRAPH is a show he always makes sure that he goes to, because from a visualization standpoint, that's where the people are actually doing, the software work on this side. But I would say too, just as far as going forward and determining what's valuable, and I want to throw this out because I think it may be a good point in the call for everybody. Really what this is going to be, is this finally going to be the time where we reevaluate why we're meeting? For years, we've said the meeting could have been an email, right? We go in a room and I read you a PowerPoint for an hour. Why did we have that meeting? You could have read all that material. There's nothing happening in there. And now we're having a meeting that could have been a Zoom call, that could have been an email, right? Like, why did we go into the office when we could have been on Zoom? And why did we even have the Zoom call when I could have read this myself, right? And is this the time when we finally, as organizations, say, why are we in this space? And what is the value of being physically together? Because really, like, a meeting should only have three purposes, right? It's to create a forum, so you get lots of opinions. It's to actually make a decision, so you have all those decision makers in the room and you can come to a consensus and have a debate. Or it's for team building, for building teams together. But for sharing information, it's not the right format to have 7 people sit around and have somebody read to them. It just doesn't work so well. People get distracted. So do we see, this is a general question for everybody, and I'm hijacking your questions, Tim. Does anybody else see in their conversations where people are actually starting to reevaluate and finally have this question, like, why are we meeting? And if we are going to meet, what do we need? What do we really need to make that valuable based on why we're in the room? Because if we're not having that conversation, we're just going to get another iteration of what we have already.
Yeah, it's bidirectional interaction, it's whiteboarding, it's group just collaboration. You need to get something more out of it. What you were going in there than just watching something. You want to engage. And I think that you can do that. There's a lot of tools that allow you to do that now, even through our standard web platform. There's a lot of ways that you can use it beyond just seeing talking heads on a screen and watching a PowerPoint. Get together and bidirectionally annotate and use a lot of these whiteboarding functions that are out there, new tools that people are using every day to collaborate and really engage. And a lot of times I think now we've been forced to be able to do this with collaboration. As we're working with architects, we're forced to be able to and actually it's not forced, it's we've got the benefit now of being able to engage on a higher level. And I see what Akin and Mark, what you're talking about, and I love looking into the future and seeing, I want to see the next steps. I want to see where we go from there, and bringing in not just in conference rooms, but collaborative in classroom spaces and other locations where we can all get together socially in a space, in more of a virtual environment, and really truly re-engage.
Yeah. And you know who's asking that question? Millennials and Gen Zers. They're asking, why do I have to be here?
Right.
They're my son all the time is like, why do I have to be here? I can just text, I can just sit, jump on a Snapchat or whatever the case might be. Why do I actually have to physically be in this particular space? And I think that's something that we have to really pay close attention to, because millennials and Gen Zers, they are going to be the decision makers, in these future conference rooms that we're talking about. They're going to have an expectation to utilize these systems based on the way that they currently do things in their own personal lives. So in another 10 years, my son who, was born with a smartphone in his hand, is going to expect to do everything on his smartphone or some sort of virtual implementation of that. It's going to be app-based. Everything's going to be apps. They're not going to be interested in coming in and sitting down if they don't have to. So I completely agree with what you're saying, Mark, about, asking that question, why? It's a really important question because it's really good. It really drives the solution. If the question is, we don't need to come in, well, then how can we actually create an environment and set up a solution that's going to allow for that sort of immersive, that sort of connected sharing of information that, we want to do beyond what we're currently doing today, value added.
Yeah, and I'd say, the interesting stat, when I was putting together some stuff like this for an architect, is that, although they may not be in decision maker roles now, Gen Z and millennials are 60% of the workforce this year. So they are the majority. They're not the minority of the workforce. They may not be signing the checks yet. They may not be the economic buyer, the decision maker that's buying systems. But if we're not tailoring what we're doing to that, we're in trouble.
Well, Mark Jones, let me bring you in on this from a education standpoint. How are we redesigning and rethinking and reimagining the classroom to serve this new generation? To Akin's point, why do I have to be here? I mean, I think the education system has proven that, at least to some extent, and we can argue about the effectiveness of Zoom classes, right? But how are we adjusting those expectations when it comes to in-person classrooms?
Well, we've actually started that a few years ago when PA went to the cadaver labs, when we had to share with another school, is why do we need to go into this smelly place and touch all this stuff when there's actually now 3D fully automated, where you can actually work on that. So, and you don't have to have everybody take the time over holidays and a lab and be right on top of each other. So that, along with some of the other physical therapies and some in the nursing and also in pharmacy, this last COVID piece has really got us looking more and more into the 3D gaming type conventions and where they can sit there on the screen with other people, and the instructor can ask them, where is this particular nerve or where is this, and they can actually watch them do that and design it, and everybody's seeing the same thing. I wouldn't say it's there yet like a super game Halo or something, but we're definitely pushing toward that, so that the only time you physically have to be there, or you would really have to be there, is if like in Doctor of Physical Therapy, you've got to actually manipulate a person and do that. So that's where our new space spread out and how to do that and coordinate to come in there, because that's how they get their grade on. I mean, you wouldn't want to go to a physical therapist that has never worked on an actual human. So, but you can, up to that point, you can now become much more versed in how to do it before you actually start that. So across all of, we specialize in medical, a lot of pieces, but a lot of that, that's the huge change I'm seeing, is that we're going to have more and more people doing that. So why do you need to be in the classroom to watch that? Why do you need, they can do all that virtually.
No.
Why not be able to use that to reach out to other people, students, employees that are distance challenged, and bring in that content and share that and collaborate with them from afar, and reaching out to other markets, reaching out to bringing in other talent to that meeting to make it that much more powerful, or an educational session, a class session, to make it that more enriching.
All right, Mark Coxon, let me bring this back around for a second here. You mentioned the fact that sometimes, and we all joke about it, the fact that this meeting could have been an email. How do we make meetings, or how do we make getting back into the office? How do we make coming into the office worthwhile? Like, what is it What is it? And is it just the content? Is it the fact that this is the outcome that we want to get out of it? So this has to be a meeting. How do we make coming back in the office and make these meetings more more desirable?
I'm gonna throw one thing out there before he starts.
Yeah.
It could be that you want to get paid if the person that owns the company doesn't like you working at home.
Well, there is that. We can have that conversation in a second too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and this all comes to the point of, like I said, why are we meeting? If we're not asking that question, we're in trouble, right? Like, what is the outcome that we're trying to get out of getting together and coming into this space? For me, I've been talking to, like I said, a lot of these entrepreneurs. Some of it's the creativity that happens when people are in a room. I mean, I'm a biology guy. We release chemicals when we're together in a room, and our brains pick up on those. And sometimes they make us like each other, and sometimes they don't. But they create this tension, right? There's there's a bunch of workplace studies that say standing up and moving around actually opens your brain up. If I sit down in a chair and you give me an idea and I'm lounging back in my chair, the second you put an idea out, Stanford showed that lounging in a low chair makes you in a critical mode, not in a creative mode, right? So if I sit in this office chair every day, you talked about a recliner earlier, if I sit in that chair every day and I'm in that mode, that puts my brain in a mode of analyzing and not in a mode of creating, right? So if we want to have this outcome, know that there are 5 commonalities between what makes that outcome possible. Then we need to make sure that we have the people in the environment that facilitates that. I can have somebody call in from home, but if they just got off a call with their kid's teacher and they got popcorn going in the microwave and they're trying to manage their mute button and their camera and their iPhone back to their Zoom, the chances of you creating the momentum that you're trying to create in that meeting is very, very low. Okay. And if we're doing something that's synchronous, then that's okay, because you can do it on your own time and put it into Slack or put it into a program and we can all analyze and have a meeting about it later. That's valuable too. But for things that need to get done, where there needs to be a decision made, where there needs to be consensus on something, when we need to have this creative storm of ideas, there are certain things that make that happen, and being able to control that helps.
I think ad hoc environments, where you allow that creativity, and I think Mark, you noted that early on too, is being able to make sure that there is an environment. If you're there, you're a little bit more able to just have these close encounters with people rather than just monitoring and seeing if and making sure that you're available to them, but knowing that you're physically there. There's something there to be able to support team members and to be able to answer questions or ask questions a little bit more fluidly and a little bit more spontaneously than rather just chat sessions. It's more personal.
I would say too, one thing that's come up a few times is, a lot of companies had success in working remote over the last 3-4 months. How old were these companies? Because the companies that have employees that already know each other, that already trust each other, that have worked together, that have, the Dunbar rule of 100 people that I can manage in my head, key rule. Like I know Bob, I like Bob. When I pass Bob in the hall, I don't want Bob to be mad at me that I didn't get my job done. We had that, and we carried these emotional connections that we forged in person. We carried those with us into our virtual world. So there are a lot of companies that are young, startup, forming, forging, new team members. Do they have the advantages of these pre-existing social bonds that were created in person? And they don't. And so how do we create environments where we forge people together so that when we do work virtually, the accountability, the trust, there's no need for micromanagement, people reciprocate because they want to. That's where our social bonds have really helped with this. And I don't know that young companies with people that haven't worked together a lot had the same level of success in trusting each other to what they're doing as companies that may have teams that have history.
Yeah, absolutely. Akin, as we wrap up here, Mark mentioned a couple of studies saying, if we stand up, we're more creative. We sit back, we're more critical. That goes beyond what's in my CTS class, right? That's beyond. Now, Mark Coxon is one of these unique individuals. He's an I and a D, right? So he's CTS all over the place. But beyond that, what are the skill sets that we need beyond understanding digital workflow and acoustics and everything? What is that new skill set that we need to create these future ready rooms?
I think one of the things that we have to make sure is that we're, I always go back to storytelling. We are all natural storytellers in one way, shape, or form. Even when we have a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet that we're trying to communicate to people. Actually, the best examples is you take a teacher, for example. I can think of a teacher that I had that I remember from 8th grade, and it was based on the way that she taught the information. She was my English teacher, and based on the way that she taught it versus the way another teacher teaches the exact same information, the way that she told the story about, prepositional phrases and conjunctions and, punctuation and the whole 9 yards, I remembered that, and it stuck with me, and having that storytelling capability, that's something that, some people, have a gift for it and you have to hone it. And some people have to learn it. But it's something that we all do. We all have to kind of tap into our storytelling selves. And I think, if we're approaching it from that standpoint, we'll start utilizing the tools that we have to leverage that end game, which is how do I make sure that this story that I'm telling to my client or that I'm telling to my people and my colleagues internally, how do I make sure that they're getting the best information in the best possible way, right? And then likewise, for your audience, you want them to be fully engaged in what it is that you're saying. You want them to come back into the conference room the next day, like ready to learn more, ready to re-engage. Even if it is a financial spreadsheet, how can we maybe start asking those questions? How can we make a financial spreadsheet interesting? How do we take, two-dimensional drawings and make them interesting? Everybody's looking at a 2D drawing on a table or on the screen. What about doing architectural visualization, taking that Revit file, and having people jack into it. And everybody has their own sort of experience associated with it rather than one person at the pulpit kind of like saying, this is what I want you to know. People can get really interactive with the information themselves and everybody can walk away with something extremely valuable and they'll want to come back, So I think that's some of what I'd like to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to wrap up this with one thing. Mark Jones, you mentioned this as we were kind of meandering through with millennials and Zers, and that's the idea that some managers, especially older ones, they want to see their folks in. They want to see them punch in the clock at 9 o'clock and punch out the clock at 5 o'clock, right? How do we help those folks to understand this new generation and this new workforce?
Well, the biggest thing we did is gave each one of them a laptop as they left the building and told them they had to work at home, which they're used to having their computers in front of them. And, some of them did okay. Some of them had to take experience, but the younger ones are, in the admissions reps and all them, they already, they had those, are familiar with using phones. So, you have to bring them into that world of this is how we're going to work. This is what we're going to be, whether we're in the office or whether we're at home. Our strive now is we really didn't change the way we work when people come back because they still have access to the cell phone if they go home. They have access to their laptops, so if they need to work at home because one of their kids are, so you've got all these new challenges that I guess you say the older or whoever that don't understand that said, we will never work at home. Well, that changed for the entire world. So we had to roll with it. So yeah, getting them to do that and utilize it at home and providing them the tools and making it easy enough for them to use. That's one of the key factors. The VPN, it needs to just turn it on and have everything work for them. They don't have to program this and program that. They just go to work. So that was our goal, working and getting them up where they're to speed with the newer generation.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for us. Thank you all so much. Mr. Mark Jones from South College, Mark Coxon, from Tangram Interiors, Adewole from Barracks, and Michael Dannenberg from Vantage. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
and
Tim.
I
Thank
will
you.
pass
Enjoyed
it back to the guys at Wolf Vision.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everyone, for being part of our panel today.